Just connecting to YouTube.
Okay.
We're now live on YouTube.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tilly. Right. Good afternoon, members, officers, and any members of the public. Welcome to the Planning Committee, Tuesday the 30th of March, 21. I'd like to first start by expressing my thanks to Councillor Steve Sweeney, who's now stepped down from the Planning Committee. I'd like to thank him for his commitment to the Planning Committee and chairing it over the past couple of years, I think it is now. And I'd like to wish Councillor Sweeney all the very best for the future. I'm sure members would echo that. I think Councillor Lynn, you might have a couple of words to say on that as well.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I was fortunate enough to be able to, thanks to the change in the regulations, to be able to spend an hour with Steve in his garden this morning. And as I've been called off the subs bench to substitute for him for this meeting, he particularly wanted me to pass on his thanks to everybody in the committee and to all the officers in planning, in legal, and everywhere else that have supported him whilst he's been the chair. He especially said that he missed the chance over the last year to do those minibus tours with Councillor Curtin and Councillor Baines, and he said he always enjoyed having a good chat and a bit of a joke with you then and there. So he sends his best to you and to everybody on the committee. As far as I was concerned, I'd like to echo the chair's comments, because I think we were very lucky and he's been a damn fine chair. Thank you for allowing me to say those and to pass on his thanks.
You're welcome, Councillor. I think Gurpreet wants to say something. I think Councillor Curtin. Gurpreet?
So yeah, mine was just a quick, is this, would members like a vote of thanks being noted in the minutes for this planning committee?
Oh, yes, please.
Yes, definitely.
Councillor Curtin?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would just like to send on my best wishes to Councillor Sweeney. I've worked with him on the planning committee now for some while. Prior to Councillor Sweeney taking over as chair, as you know, I was the chair of the planning committee, and we've all worked well as a team, and I would just like to wish him all the best for the future. And I think, if we can send him our best wishes from all of us, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, definitely. And Councillor Clark, did you have your hand raised?
Just the same, really. I'm repeating what everyone else has said, but I've only known Steve for a while, but he's always known what he's doing, and he's got humour. He's just a lovely person, and I thank him very much.
We'll miss him following the minibus around on his motorbike, won't we, as well? Yeah, thank you. So yeah, if that's passed on to him, that'd be fantastic. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, members. Moving on then to the agenda. Item 1, substitutes nominated for this meeting and apologies for absence. No. Okay.
It's just Councillor Lynn, isn't there, for Councillor Sweeney?
Councillor Sweeney, yeah. Okay. Item number 2, members' interest. Do any members have any disclosable or pecuniary interest or other interest they may have in relation to the items included on this agenda? Okay, no. Item number 3, admission to the public. There are no items on here that exclude members of the public. Item number 4, minutes of the previous planning meeting, which I think there is a correction needed to be made to them, and that is Councillor Lynn was in place of Councillor Sweeney, and it says on the minutes that Councillor Sweeney was there. Gurpreet?
Yeah, members, just to clarify, yeah, that there was a typo in those minutes, but you can approve the minutes subject to that correction being made. So just to clarify, you can approve the minutes subject to that amendment being made, that Councillor Lynn was in attendance, not Councillor Sweeney.
Right, okay. do we have a proposer for those minutes and a seconder? We've got Councillor Hutchinson proposing and Councillor Baines as a seconder on that one. Thank you, councillors. Item number 5, withdrawn applications. I don't believe there's any withdrawn applications for this.
No, there are none, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Item number 6, moving on to the planning applications. Now, just bear with me while I get on to the next page.
If it's okay, I'll be sharing my screen.
Okay. The first item, the first application is the land off Coal Pit Lane at Clifton Brighouse, which is 20/01354/LAA. That's over to officers.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, can I just confirm that members can see my screen clearly?
We can.
Thank you.
Yes, that's fine.
There's quite a few slides, so if you want me to halt at any point or go back or anything, just let me know. So bear with me. Let's go to the first slide. So this is an application for approval of reserve matters. In December 2019, outline planning permission was granted for the business park at Clifton. The outline permission was for the principle of development and also the means of access to the site. This application seeks approval for site-wide infrastructure, internal highway layout, highway drainage, lighting, plot levels, landscaping and ecological features. In addition, approval of various other matters that were reserved by condition at the outline stage is sought as set out in the report. So it's important to stress that further reserve matters applications would need to be brought forward for the individual units and their immediate environs at a later stage. It's also important to stress that we cannot at this stage re-examine the principle of development because that was established at the outline stage. The outline application was subject to an environmental impact assessment. At this reserve matters stage, a compliance report was submitted confirming that the development is still in compliance with the parameters considered at the outline stage. Since the publication of the report, we've received a couple of additional representations. The first representation expresses concerns about the proposed use and the ground levels of plot 7 in particular. The former issue, i.e. the use, is a matter that will be dealt with at the stage of later reserve matters when we consider the actual units, but the issue of levels is something that I'll return to in the presentation. We've also received a representation from the Clifton Neighbourhood Planning Forum that raises issues that in part relate to concerns about the visual impact assessment that formed part of the outline planning application. So that is a matter that was addressed previously and is not up for further consideration at this stage, and a concern about the heights of individual units. As explained previously, though, the height and the design of the units will be subject to later reserve matters applications. So this slide sets out the representations, 65 of which have been received, and the key issues. So this shows the location of the sorry. Apologies, I put my notebook down on the keyboard. Sorry. So this slide shows the location of the application site between the Armitage Road Industrial Estate and Clifton to the north of the A644. An aerial photograph, some years old now, but nevertheless useful in showing the context. This slide shows the road layout and the development platforms. Now, it also shows indicative details or indicative footprints of the units. However, the units are not being applied for at this stage. So at the outline application, members approve the principle of development and the points of access. Members are now considering the road layout and the development platforms, which are sort of indicated in buff, and the landscaping. This plan shows the overall structural landscaping for the site, excluding the individual plots, because again, when reserve matters comes in for individual plots, the specific landscaping will depend on the design of the units and the design of the servicing. I'm mindful that at this scale, it's quite difficult to gain an understanding of the nature of the landscaping. So on the following slides, I've included a couple of extracts. So this extract shows Wakefield Road, and this is the access off Wakefield Road. And I've included it so you can see the key to the plan. So you can see there's a wide variety of different landscaping habitat types proposed: wetland, meadow mixture, ground cover and climbing shrubs, marginal aquatic mix, and native woodland amongst other things. You can also see some of the annotations, and you'll note, as I'm indicating with the cursor, there is a proposal to include an area of publicly accessible open space within the landscaping. So this is then moving on to the sort of top side of the site, again to give you an impression of the approach to landscaping. I would draw your attention to the area I'm indicating with the cursor, which is showing an ecological area fenced off from the publicly accessible parts of the site. This plan shows the street lighting plans, essentially with the contours for the lux levels. So again, I've extracted the key so that you can hopefully see that more easily. Essentially, the design specification for the street lighting follows the approach that the council has, the council's specification for street lighting that we would install on our adopted highways. And essentially now with modern lighting units, what they do to a much more successful extent than in the past is control the spillage of light. So you can see how quickly the light contours reduce from 20 lux to 0.1 lux, being this red line. In addition, the sensitive area, which is of course the woodland that runs along Wakefield Road, is identified. That's sensitive for foraging and commuting bats, who would obviously be sensitive to artificial light. You can't, at this scale, you can't see the location of the confirmed bat roosts, unfortunately. This is the proposed electricity substation. So actually quite uncontentious, really, in terms of design and scale. These are the Coalpit Lane arrangements with drop bollards in order to restrict access. Mr. DeMock, the highways officer, will be able to answer any specific queries that you have on this. This shows the height parameters of the units, and as I say, the individual units will be subject to later reserve matters approval. But the broad approach is that there are three separate areas, with the highest units potentially 10 to 15 metres towards the toe of the slope, the medium height 6 to 10 metres in the central part of the slope, and towards the top of the slope 2.5 to 8 metres in height. So that obviously ensures that you get a sort of a diminishing height as you climb the slope, and that the relationship to the residential properties in Clifton is acceptable. This is actually quite a useful plan, because it shows the areas of cut and fill. So you can see from the red area that, broadly speaking, land will be cut out towards the top of the slope, and there'll be sort of filling towards the sort of middle of the slope in very broad terms. So again, these sections illustrate that point. So you would have taller units towards the toe of the slope, lower units towards the top, with more cutting at the top of the slope. This is an extract that I've included because it shows the section through plot 7, which is the most sensitive in terms of relationship to adjacent residential properties, because it's, I will point it out on the plan. In fact, I've got an extract actually which will follow. So if I move on to the next plan, this again it's a similar drawing, but it shows the indicative siting of the units at plots 6 and 7. As I say, I emphasize indicative, with the measurements between the existing houses and the indicative positions. again, further sections, and I've just included this as an extract from the spot heights. So this is one of the sheets showing site levels. So this is in the sort of the plot 6, plot 7 area, where you can see that you've got a typical proposed level of 98 meters and an existing of about 101.5, or in this corner, proposed 98, existing just less than 101. So it's cutting into this top embankment of the site. So moving on to the photos, this is the view from Clifton Common, and again a very similar view. You can see these houses at Clifton, and then this is a bit more of a panoramic shot that I've taken from street view, looking down Clifton Common with the site in the middle ground. So moving on to the other side of the site, Coal Pit Lane, and a view along Wakefield Road, looking effectively, this is just past the point where the dual carriageway becomes single carriageway as you come away from the Junction 25 roundabout, and you can just see the Holiday Inn within the behind the trees, and again a sort of very approximate indication of where the access would be located, as indicated with the cursor. So the final slide reiterates the representations, key issues. The recommendation is one of deemed approval, reserve matters. That reflects the fact that it's a local authority application, hence we describe it as deemed approval. And unless members would members like me to go back to any of the slides before I leave the presentation, or Councillor Curtin possibly?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, just if you could just go back to indicate where two things initially, where the public open space is proposed and where the location of the on-site substation.
The public open space is that area there. So this is the access off the A644. So it's that area there, and I'm just seeing if I can put it into context with the yes, sorry, it's difficult when you're comparing the two plans. It's in that location, I believe. And
how is that accessible to the public then, Richard?
Oh, when it's clearly, I think the principal users are likely to be people working within the business park. I mean, it will be accessible to anybody who happens to go into the site, but I imagine it's going to be an area that is probably more, and I'm sort of surmising this, it's going to be the sort of area where employees will eat their lunch and socialise and the
right.
The
Okay.
substation, bear with me, I'm struggling to yeah, I'm sorry, given the scale, I'll need to sorry, it's pixelated a bit. I would need to check that, because at this it's quite pixelated on my screen.
Right.
I think I can see it, but but I can't get the resolution to. I'll need to come back on that one.
Okay, if you could come back on that, Richard, because as you know from past experience, we've had problems with locations of substations being close to housing development.
Yeah, I don't. This one, I'm sure won't be, but I'll double check that.
Okay, thank you for that.
Councillor Clark wishing to speak. So obviously it's open now to questions to officers.
Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
I thought the substation was almost at the entrance to the site from Wakefield Road.
That's a pumping station there.
Councillor Curtin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just another question, Richard. You've spoke about plots 6 and 7, and I appreciate they're only indicative at this stage, and the fact that they will sit lower down by being cut into the banking there. But they do look fairly close to existing residential properties, and my concern is with possible noise issues from these units. If you could make a comment on that, please.
Well, the bear with me. The separation is actually, there's a plan which shows the separation. Bear with me. Yes, the separation is in the region of sort of at that nearest point, 24 meters. So whilst it looks quite close on the on the plan, it's actually a reasonable separation. You've then got obviously the drop in levels,
Yes.
the design and specification of the buildings, and obviously sort of conditions that control sound insulation and noise attenuation and the like. So it's not anticipated that you would get any issues of noise disamenity given that relationship.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
I'm struggling to see all members because I've only got 6.
Should I close the presentation? Sorry.
Yeah, please. Thank you, Richard. Any more members? Any more questions, members, to our officers on that presentation? No. Okay. Right. We'll move on. We actually have an objector who wishes to speak on this application. We have a Jason Shoesmith. Jason, can you hear us? Okay.
Yes, I can. Thank you, Chair.
Jason, you have 5 minutes to put forward your case on this, your comments. That will be timed. At the end of your 5 minutes, members will have the opportunity to ask you any questions. Gurpreet, are you taking time? Yeah. Jason, it's over to you. You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Firstly, as a resident of Clifton and someone who works within the construction industry, I'm personally not against appropriate development. I do, however, find the proposals for the proposed industrial estate only meters from the back gardens of residential properties to be wholly inappropriate for this location. That said, should the scheme ever come to fruition, I make the following point and ask that the committee to please consider them carefully when deciding the matters covered by this reserved matters application. Firstly, buildings 6, 7, 8, 11, 12 and 17, all of which sit within close proximity to the residential properties, should be reclassified as B1, B1A and B1B in order to protect the residential amenity of the neighbouring properties. Locating light and general industrial buildings in such close proximity to residential property is completely unacceptable. The second point I'd like to make is regarding the emergency service access onto Culprit Lane, which again is totally unnecessary and will likely become problematic in future. Can the planning committee seek justification from the applicant as to why this even needs to exist, as emergency services would not use it due to their relative locations in relation to the site? Why would the emergency services choose to use a bollard restricted access off a substandard highway when either Wakefield Road or Clifton Common access points could be used? For instance, the Leeds City Council Street Design Guide, which is used by a lot of West Yorkshire authorities, quotes, "Wherever possible, development should be designed so that there is no requirement for emergency vehicle only links. These are difficult to enforce if there is no physical barrier, and if there is a physical barrier, it can cause delays for emergency vehicles." I therefore request that the Planning Committee consider recommending this access to be removed for all except pedestrians and cyclists. The third point I'd like to make is regarding lighting. Clifton already suffers from significant levels of light pollution from the nearby industrial estates, such that the sky is bright milky white on an overcast night. I therefore request that the security lighting to all proposed buildings be time restricted to protect residential amenity. Whilst this goes against secure by design principles, it only highlights the inappropriateness of the proposals so close to residential property. The fourth point I'd like to make is regarding design. And whilst the design of individual buildings will be covered by future applications, there is currently no cohesive design strategy to govern the design of the buildings themselves. This needs to be urgently addressed to ensure ad hoc, poor quality tin sheds are not delivered in the same way as poor planning controls have allowed the characterless neighbouring industrial estates. A consistent design strategy for the buildings themselves must be considered as part of condition 48 to ensure that only quality buildings with muted tones and appropriate pump materials are used. The fifth point I'd like to make is in relation to the turning head, which has been shown on the master plan some 180 metres away from the highway termination at Culprit Lane. In no way does this comply with recommended highway design guidance, which would usually require a turning facility within 25 metres of a dead end in an industrial situation.
1 minute remaining.
Why has this been relaxed so significantly here? Could the applicant not consider relocating buildings 20 and 21 adjacent to building 16, thus freeing up more space adjacent to Culprit Lane for compliant turning head? This would also allow for a planted green buffer and would ease the significant level issues between the proposed building 21 and Culprit Lane. Finally, I would like Planning Committee to consider requesting that an appropriate TRO be put in place to prevent overnight HGV parking as occurs nightly on the other industrial estates in the locality. Against the will of pretty much all residents in Clifton, this development has been thrust upon us by the council. It has steamrolled its way through the planning process despite massive objection from local residents. For a multitude of reasons, it's inappropriate for this location. Therefore, I implore the Planning Committee to consider these well-intended, justifiable and practical comments.
Thank you, Jason. That's 5 minutes is up now.
Thank you, Chair.
Stay on because members can actually ask you questions at this point. So, members, is there any questions for Jason at this point? Councillor Curtin. Councillor Curtin, you're on mute.
Sorry, Chair, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Yep. Yeah, thank you. It's not directly a question to Mr. Shoesmith, but it's what Mr. Shoesmith actually commented on. 2 points. One is if our highways department or the planning officers could make a comment on the access egress from Culprit Lane, because I know Culprit Lane is quite narrow. And the other one is that he mentioned about the parking of HGVs on site overnight and the possibility of engines ticking over. Thank you, Chair.
I would pass those questions to Mr. DeMock, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you, Richard.
Well, I think can we come back to those questions and at the end if they're questions for officers and not questions for...
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it's in relation to what Mr. Shoesmith said, that's all, you know.
We'll take those at the end then if you want, David, we'll keep those.
Yeah, whichever way, you know, so long as we don't forget them, you know.
No, we won't. Is there any more questions for
Thank you.
whilst he's on? No, okay. Thank you, Jason, for your time today.
Thank you.
We have Councillor. Yes.
Chair, is it okay if I just come back to Councillor Curtin's question about the substation? Because I've got a plan that I can share on the screen if that.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Richard.
If that's okay. Can members see this okay? It was where I thought it was, but as I say, looking at it on the PowerPoint, unfortunately, the plan's just sort of pixelated too much. So I've opened the plans on the website. So yes, that's the position of the substation. So it's certainly a good distance away from any residential property. So that's Clifton Common, and that's the substation location, members.
Thank you for that, Richard. Quite happy with that then.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Councillor Blackburn, you have 5 minutes to speak as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak on behalf of local residents. There's been a large number of objections on this particular application. I must admit, I found it quite confusing because actually I understand that outline planning permission was granted in 2019, but actually what does reserved matters actually mean to the general layperson? So I think one thing is to point out, I think the communication could have been a little bit more effective to actually outline what these things were. Equally, the late uploading of some documents as well, which I have issues with. You know, I've objected on behalf of the residents previously. I have issues in terms of the viability of as no funding is now available from the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. I appreciate that this is not a planning consideration, but it is something that actually is something we need to revise. If we're looking at the details of this, and this is the key element, I guess, then we're looking at traffic issues. And actually one of the main issues, which I did raise at the outline planning permission, still think it's very, very relevant, and that is we need a controlled junction at the on Clifton Common. It is an extremely busy junction. It's going to get even busier with the amount of additional lorries. Equally on the actual site itself, what you've not proposed, I don't think, you might correct me wrong, is yellow lines, and is there going to be adequate parking within the compounds of the actual units itself? The other element, of course, and I don't think it's been taken into consideration, is actually the holiday inn, the visitors coming to the area because of the beauty of the area. Actually, what noise levels are they going to experience? So quite a number of different things. The other thing I'm not fully appreciate and don't really think it's been addressed adequately is the mitigation of flooding issues. You know, we experience a large amount of flooding. I know you put things in place, but actually, you know, over the last few months with the additional rain, actually Wakefield Road was absolutely inadequate to cope with this additional water coming off the hillside. With this being concreted, it causes even more issues as far as I can see. The other element is the additional burden this is going to place on the area, and we only have to look at the Lidl being built without any infrastructure being put in place. So the bottom of Clifton Common is absolutely is gridlocked at the best of times, and these are the issues that we have to experience as residents on a daily basis. It's not just an outline planning permission. It's not just whatever reserve matters, but actually these people are having to live with the congestion every single day. Actually, putting the road junctions, putting a new road in the actual Clifton Enterprise Zone is one thing, but it doesn't address the additional areas outside those things. Realise we're looking at this application, and I've tried to make it more relevant to issues. Equally, I don't think there's enough planting. I'm not totally convinced in relation to the stability of the actual land itself, considering it used to be coal mines. And actually, what you're proposing to put instead of a walling at the north side of the site, rather than what was previously proposed. So quite a large number of things. It's already been touched in relation to the pollution, air pollution, light pollution. So quite, it is. I understand the complexity of this application, but if we're looking at the detail, we need to look at those extra things because it's so important for the additional residents around the different areas. I think I'm going to close my comments there to welcome any questions from members, of course. Equally as well, just whilst I've still got the time limit, Andrew McGelliot has submitted a written submission. I don't know if you members have had the opportunity to actually see that. If they haven't, then I would request that these are read out. Thank you, Chair.
Gurpreet, I don't think we're allowed to take that away at this point, or
Is it is it a representation that's been submitted to planning? Was it submitted in? Was it submitted in? I guess mine's a further question to Richard. Then, have you received the representation and has it been summarised in the report? Firstly.
It was a late representation, which at the beginning of my presentation, I covered the late representations, one of which I attributed to the Clifton Neighbourhood Planning Forum. The other one, which I referred to, I didn't attribute it to a particular person, but it was Dr. McElligott who was raising the concerns about plot 7 in particular. So I did address those points at the beginning of my presentation, and when I was putting the presentation together, I did so mindful of the particular comments that have been raised about plot 7. Hence, I included the zoomed in images of that part of the site.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Chair, given what Richard has said, I'm satisfied that obviously it's been considered and put before members. So yeah, Richard has already summarised the objection that's been referred to.
Can I just make a point, Chair? There's no extra additional comments, but just make it clear to the members of the public that I cannot have a vote, because I think the last time I came as a member, a councillor, I got those emails saying, why didn't you vote against this particular application? I do not have a vote, just to clarify that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Blackburn. Is there any questions then from members for Councillor Blackburn at this point? No, there's no one wishing to indicate. Okay, thank you, Councillor Blackburn, for your participation. Okay, so we're moving on now to the agent. This might be the opportunity, Councillor Curtin, for your questions at the end to the agent, actually. So this is to Yatin Mystery. This is over to you for 5 minutes.
Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to address you this afternoon. May recall granting outline consent for development in late 2019.
Can I just stop you there? We're really struggling to hear you for somehow.
Right, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yeah, it might be. You might want to turn your microphone down just a little bit if you can.
Okay, bear with us.
That sounded clearer.
Is that better?
That's better.
All right, apologies. You may recall granting outline consent for this development in late 2019. That consent established the principles of the scheme that you have before you today. As your officer's report state, these reserved matters are within the parameters set out by the outline consent and the environmental statement that accompanied it. Considerable work has gone into the scheme to ensure an acceptable proposal and one that meets with the satisfaction of the statutory consultees. Approval of the scheme today will provide the basis for future applications that shall come forward upon each plot once these infrastructure works are in place. Fundamentally, this project will enable a much needed employment site to come forward and deliver some 1,300 jobs. Given this, I can only endorse your office's recommendation of approval to you. I am joined by members of the consultant team, and we will be happy to address any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasin. Any questions from members to the agent?
Chair, shall I leave my questions for officers?
Yeah, unless Yatin can answer those questions. If you want to put them across,
I
Councillor.
don't know whether it's appropriate for Yatin to. Sorry.
I can possibly pass them on to like say Andrew Dumont for one of the questions that you raised earlier, and possibly to the agents I have with me.
Yeah, if you want to put your questions across now, Councillor Kurt, and then between Yasin and
Okay, well, there were two questions. Yeah, thank you, Chair. There were two questions there. One was, why do we need this access onto Coalpit Lane? I appreciate it's only very narrow. And the other one was, what provisions will be implemented or set up to prevent HGVs parking overnight with their engines ticking over, especially during the winter months?
Right, so if I could pass the first one on to Andrew Dumont, please.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
In terms of the emergency access, I think Mr. Shoesmith did raise that query, didn't they, about why is there a need for it? I mean, there will be an access road, obviously, serving those units in any event, and we also need pedestrian cycle access from Clifton and from the north. So for a large site, you generally, the more the merrier in terms of access for emergency vehicles. Fire engines, say there was a large fire, would come from various directions. And if an access was blocked elsewhere. So, given it's already there, the access to put the bollards in, it's a standard method of controlling access whilst allowing active travel users. So it's not something I would want removed. It's part of the application. We're happy with it. It can be controlled. So I don't really see an issue with it. So what was the second point? I've got 3 noted down here from Mr. Shoesmith.
Thank you. Yeah. Chair, through you.
For the turning head of the TRO. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. It was a traffic regulation order, wasn't it, Councillor Curtin?
Well, the other issue that I raised was what provisions would be put in place to prevent HGVs parking overnight on the site with their engines ticking over, especially during the winter months, annoying local residents.
Yeah, that was actually discussed during the application. The applicant did raise that and asked if we wanted whether we should have yellow lines. And I reviewed a few other employment areas in Bradford, Leeds, and generally they don't cause problems. So to the view, if there was to be a problem, obviously as a higher authority, we could implement them fairly readily. So at the moment we would want to just
thank you, Chair.
put them in at the start.
Thank you. Okay, any more questions for the agent? Okay, no one's wishing to speak. Okay, thank you, Yatin, for your time on that. Okay, members, any comments or proposals on the application? Councillor Baines.
Thank you. Councillor Blackburn raised a point about, and I think he's raised this previously, about some sort of control of traffic on Clifton Common. Some traffic lights or something to enable a better movement of traffic in and out of the site, and also up and down Clifton Common. And I'd also like Mr. Shoesmith's questions about the highways issues that he raised as well. If we could have a comment on those, thank you.
Okay, I think that would be our highways officer, Andrew Dumont.
Yes, Chair. I'll respond. Well, obviously the traffic issues were well explored with the outline application. The means of access on the traffic impact were assessed, and the junction capacity assessments, I checked those, and we were happy with the proposals. So obviously this is the reserve matters application. It doesn't really deal with those issues. So in terms of a signalised additional set of signals, we don't consider it's necessary, so we couldn't really ask the applicant to put those in.
Okay. Councillor Hutchinson.
I recognise this isn't one of the reserved matters that we're talking about, but has there been a zoning applied to the uses of the various plots? You know, it's 1A, 1B, 1C, etc. Or is that to be determined as each plot comes into an application is made for each plot?
Just to the use of the individual units will come forward with the individual reserve matters applications. So that will then be a subject for consideration at that stage. Just jumping back for a moment to the point about the Clifton Common and traffic lights. If I recall correctly, going back to the planning committee that determined the outline application, I think the proposition of signalising that junction was considered or was discussed in quite a lot of detail at that stage. And of course, that would have been the appropriate stage to have that discussion, because access to the adopted highway was the one detailed matter that was considered at the outline planning application stage. So I don't think it's something that we could revisit at this stage.
Okay. I've got Councillor Clark wishing to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I don't know if this is part of this planning meeting or maybe for the design of the individual plots, but you did show us a graphic of the height allowed on each level, and I'm a bit concerned about the back row, which is really an 8 metre height, which is really quite massive, isn't it? 125 foot height at the back. Would that not be obtrusive for the residents above there?
No, I mean, those were the parameters, the sort of maximum and minimum parameters that were considered at the outline stage. It might be worth me just sharing my screen again, if that's okay. So you've got separation.
Excuse
there.
me, Richard. It's not about the distance from. It's about the height, permitted height of the building.
Yes. Well, no. My answer to that question would be, given the relative ground levels between the development platform and the adjacent residential property, and the separation, because that is a factor. My advice to members is that relationship in principle would be an acceptable one, bearing in mind that you're talking about if we go back to this slide, we're talking about a range of 2.5 to 8 meters, and the indicative details, as I understand it, the sections show the upper end of that range, which would be 8.
Really quite.
But ultimately, that's a matter for the reserve matters application. It's not an issue that the current application could be refused on, because those sort of ranges have been set, and the reserve matters application will then consider where within that range is the appropriate point to set the height at. So
Can I ask another question?
This is just illustrative. The position of the building on the the height of the building on the section that I'm showing.
Yeah. Would each individual plot have to go through planning?
Yes, yeah. So
yeah,
and
as their uses
you would
change,
need to apply
yeah.
for a reserve matters submission, and they might come forward individually, or they might come forward in groups. What will often happen is that a reserve matters application will come forward to suit a particular occupier, or have different needs. But yes, every building, every individual plot will be subject to either an individual reserve matters application, or will form part of a bigger reserve matters application.
So we're only actually agreeing on the sites at the moment, not any of the buildings on the sites, just the pads. Okay. Is there any more?
Essentially, yes, yeah. Members are sort of considering the I suppose the sort of the structure of the development, the sort of the skeleton of the development. So the sort of the roads, the landscaping, and these platforms.
Okay. Is there any more questions, comments, or proposals from members? Okay. So we shall go to the vote then. So those in favour of officers' recommendations?
Chair, sorry, we haven't had a proposal or a seconder for that motion yet. So
we need a proposal. Apologies. So Councillor Lynn?
Sorry. Yes, I'm happy to propose that we go with officers' recommendations.
Okay. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Hutchinson. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Those against officers' recommendations? Okay, no one against, and any abstentions? So I thought, so that has actually carried then. Okay. So no objections and no abstentions.
yeah, I just want to clarify on that. So Councillor Curtin and Councillor Baines, are you abstaining, or you? Because I've not.
Yeah.
Sorry, Councillor.
I will be abstaining, Chair.
Okay.
And Councillor Baines, you're abstaining as well.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. So there are two abstentions.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
That proposal's carried. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Moving on to item 2, which is the Canal Side Mill, Burnley Road, Mytham Road, Ebden Bridge. This is 18/00779/out. So this is over to officers.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's myself. So if you could just bear with me, I'll try and share my screen. Can you see anything, councillors?
Yes.
Yeah. Are you just seeing the one slide?
We are, Maria.
Yes, just the
Oh,
one.
that's
Yeah.
brilliant. Thank you ever so much. Right, yes, as Chair said, this is application 18//00779. It is Canal Side Mill, Burnley Road, Mythenroyd. It is demolition of the existing mill complex and construction of 11 townhouses. The application is part retrospective because the mill building has already been demolished. It was subject of a fire and on safety grounds it had to be removed. The application is brought to planning committee, due to the sensitive nature of the application and also at the request of Ward Councillor Scott Patient. You will see that we had a number of representations, 10 letters of objection, 4 representations and 1 letter of support. And we'd also had an objection from the Town Council. The key issues that we have to look at with this application, firstly, the principle of development, and I'll just run through these before I go through the rest of the slides. The site is employment land, but given that the replacement Calderdale UDP policies are out of date, we do have to consider this proposal in the light of the MPPF. And the MPPF encourages local authorities to avoid the long-term protection of sites allocated for employment use if they are not going to be put forward for that purpose. You will see that the officers consulted the council's SME growth manager, and he commented that he had no issues with this application as the site is no longer fit for employment use. So given that, your officers feel that the principle of development is acceptable. In terms of layout, design and materials, and again, I'll show you this as we go through the slides, the developments for 11 residential units on a 0.25 hectare site, which equates to approximately 44 units per hectare. It is a fairly high density development, but there is other high density development in the immediate area by way of the terrace dwellings, but there is also some open land to the north and west. The south of the site, you will see that there is commercial and residential. The constraints of the site and the car parking and turning area requirements dictate the amount of land that's actually available for development. The proposed layout uses the previous footprint of the mill building in order to provide acceptable parking for the townhouses. The development incorporates carports and cycle and bin storage areas at the ground floor level. This also helps with raise the level of habitable rooms, because this site does fall within elements of the high risk flood zone. And again, I will cover that when we look at the flood risk and drainage issues. There were some initial concerns about the design of this proposal. The Canals and River Trust felt that the original scheme did not reflect the massing and industrial development that was on the site before the mill building was demolished. Your officers agreed with these comments and actually looked for a redesign. This has taken place. The Canals and Rivers Trust have welcomed the proposed changes, and we now feel that the proposal does satisfy the policies of the replacement Calderdale Unitary Development Plan and the MPPF. In terms of residential amenity, the site is located adjacent to the busy A646. So we are looking at potential noise issues for future occupiers. Since the report was published, we have had a further response from our environmental health officer, and I'm just going to move on to that slide because it's fairly lengthy what we're looking to now include as additional conditions. you will see that we want to be very specific about the noise levels that will be allowable for those living in those properties. So we've been very specific in terms of that for certain times of the day. We're also looking that our environmental health officer was not happy that the contamination risk assessment had fully established the level of risk that could be there. So again, we are looking to put more detailed conditions in terms of land contamination. So they will be additional conditions to those that you've got in your reports, members. So just going back then in terms of the issues we need to consider, the other issue is highways considerations. The Assistant Director for Highways has been consulted. Originally, again, there were concerns raised, but the applicant has liaised with the Highways Department, and following the submission of a topographical survey and a revised layout, the proposal is considered to be acceptable subject to conditions. And one of those relates to the provision of a 2-metre footway along the site frontage at Carr Lane and Burnley Road, and also such things as prevention of mud on road, bin storage details, ground levels, etc. Going back then to flood risk and drainage, the site is located within flood zones 2 and 3, and as such a flood risk assessment came in with this application. Also, the applicant has agreed to implement a number of measures such as flood resistant design, and also to sign up to the EA flood warnings and the flood plan. As the whole site is below the design flood level, there is no land higher than this available. So basically the building footprint is considerably smaller than that of the previous mill building. So we do have to consider that there is an advantage there. But having said that, we have, as legislation requires us to do, undertaken a sequential test, and basically that we're happy now. The Environment AG has been consulted, they have no objections. The flood risk manager has been consulted and has no objections subject to conditions. Yorkshire Water Services, again consulted and no objection subject to conditions. So with the conditions we're looking to put onto this approval, we're happy that it meets local and national policies. I've mentioned previously about ground conditions. A contamination report was put in. As you'll see, our environmental health officer is looking that we actually include some more conditions because they're not happy it covers everything that is needed to ensure that the development is safe for future occupiers, but this is something that can be conditioned. Wildlife ecology, again, we're now happy that this would satisfy the local and national policies, also in relation to trees and landscaping. Finally, then, just in terms of infrastructure and other needs, obviously policy GCF1 of the UDP established that all infrastructure and other needs, including education and open space, which arise from development, should be provided for by the developer. So in that regard, a commuted sum of £11,870 has been requested in relation to open space. The applicant has agreed to provide this through a legal agreement. And also, as there are insufficient secondary school places in the area, then there needs to be a contribution of £37,234 for additional demand. And again, the applicant has agreed to this through a legal agreement. Affordable housing, the proposed site is in Zone C, where the threshold for affordable provision is 15 homes or more. Given that the proposal is only for 11, then there's no requirement for affordable housing on site. The West Yorkshire Police Architectural Officer has considered the proposal in terms of crime prevention and has provided recommendations in order to reduce crime. Again, we're putting on a condition so that the development is carried out in accordance with secured by design. In terms of public health, the Council's Assistant Director Neighbourhoods was consulted and had no objection to the development, subject again to a condition stating that the development should be carried out in accordance with the recommendations that were in the submitted air quality assessment that came in with the application. So in conclusion, we are mindful to permit, subject to a legal agreement being completed covering the open space and education contributions, and also obviously the specified conditions. If I could then just talk you through the plans and also the photographs of the site. This is the site. As you see, it's adjacent to the main road and also adjacent to the river at the south. This is an aerial view which obviously showed the mill building before it had to be demolished on health and safety grounds. This is the site layout plan, which shows the ground floor layout as well. I've got a number of floor layout plans and elevations, but actually when we get to the visualization, hopefully members, you'll be able to see the development in its context a little better, because it's often difficult with these two-dimensional plans. So this is the elevation fronting Burnley Road. That's onto the River Calder. The elevation to the existing access road, and the courtyard elevation, which is to the east. That's the external courtyard elevation. And that's the inner gable elevation. We've got the full floor plans. Obviously the ground floor was on the site layout plan. This is the first floor plan, second floor plan, and the attic floor plan. And this is the visualization, which hopefully will allow you to see the development in its context a little better. This is the view of the vacant site looking east from the access onto Burnley Road. View of the site looking east along Burnley Road. And this is the view of the site again from Burnley Road looking south, obviously a panoramic camera shot for you there. This is the proposed site looking west along Burnley Road. And this is the view of the site looking north from the River Calder. And a wider shot again there for you. This is the site, and this is in the context of bank buildings on Burnley Road. And these are the dwellings and commercial properties that are to the south of the site and the River Calder. This is the view from Burnley Road of the former Canal Slide Mill. South elevation of the former mill. And the eastern elevation of the former mill. You will see in a lot of the representations, obviously there was concern raised about the loss of the building, but obviously that was something that had to take place due to the fire and the fact that the building was no longer safe. And that's the images of western part of the north elevation of the former mill. So that's the electricity distribution site, which is to the western access onto Burnley Road. And again, the final slide just showing the key issues we have to consider And again, just to remind members, your officer recommendation is mindful to permit, subject to a legal agreement. Chair, would you like me to stop sharing my screen?
Yes, unless there's any members wanting to look at any slides before we go on to questions. I don't think there's anybody.
Okay, I'll stop sharing them for the moment.
Okay. Right. Members, any questions to our officer? Okay, Councillor Hutchinson.
I'm happy with the measures that have been outlined in the flood risk assessment to try and reduce the risk of flooding to this property, but I was wondering how much thought had been given to the the development exacerbating flood risk downstream in terms of how surface water runoff is handled, whether there's any scope for retaining surface water on site before it at times of heavy rain. And then I also wondered how much consideration given with the North Light roof that's being proposed. You've obviously got a significant amount of south-facing roof space, as to whether any consideration has been given to the use of photovoltaic panels on those south-facing aspects.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. In relation to drainage, obviously there will be a drainage condition attached to it. I think the one thing to bear in mind is actually the intensity of development that will take place is far less than was originally on the site. And yes, it's very, in some respects with new development, you have got a much better opportunity to design drainage that's much more sustainable than we had when these old buildings were around. So it does give us the opportunity through the condition to make sure it is something that's acceptable to us. In relation to photovoltaics, that's probably something that I will have to maybe ask the agent to pick up on when it comes his time to speak. I think the key thing is obviously policy is emerging in terms of the new local plan, and certainly in terms of sustainable design measures, we will have much more scope when we've got the new local plan adopted. At the moment, it's very much driven by building regulation requirements rather than planning.
Okay. Any more questions from members to officer at this point? No. Okay, moving on. I don't think we have any objectors for this, or I don't have a name down for an objector for this one. However, I do have Councillor Scott Patient who wishes to speak. Councillor, you've got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully I shouldn't need that. And I'm, very much not speaking as an objector. I'm speaking as a supporter of this site. Just really due to the fact that it's got such romance attached to it, as one of these dark satanic mills that that we're sadly losing all over the place. I think many, as has been mentioned, many of the objections are now sadly satisfied by the fact that that building actually doesn't exist anymore. They're about the retention of that building and other matters associated. I think why I wanted to bring it to this committee is because it's such an important gateway site. It's sort of mentioned within the report about it being a prestigious development at the entrance to the Pennine Centre, and I don't think that can be underestimated, really. It really is the sort of entrance to Mythenroyd. We all know the history. The fact is we need houses, and these are of a significant design. I'm really pleased to see the pitch roof make an appearance. That's already been reflected by Russell Dean, who recently rebuilt their factory and reflected the heritage of that site with pitched roofs. I do think I'd like to hear more about the sustainable urban drainage options that are on the site. Clearly some of this has been answered with the flood risk assessment, but there are some quite low cost opportunities to add things like rainwater harvesting to some of these sites, and quite helpful that Slow the Flow have done an opportunity mapping exercise in and around Mydenroyd that you can look at and draw some ideas from. Pleased to hear about overcoming some of the sequential tests around future vulnerability, and these have all been answered in terms of it being recognised that it's such an exemplar site. I guess one of the only concerns I have is around the possible disruption to the A646, and I guess I'd just like to make a plea to the developers and the builders when the site is being built upon, which I hope is soon, because I think we all really want to see development on that site soon. It's an important site and it's currently doing nothing. Is that the disruption to the A646 is kept to a minimum. We have had 5 years of quite severe disruption to that road thanks to the flood alleviation scheme, and I think managing that for the community and just making sure that is right is going to be really important as this goes forward. But no, wholly satisfied with how things have progressed on this, and really great design. So no, I'm entirely in support of this. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Patient. Any questions from members for Councillor Patient? No. Okay, thank you. Now we've got the applicant, or the agent, should I say the agent, Sam Deacon. You have 5 minutes to speak on the application.
Chair, members of the committee and officers, thank you for the opportunity to talk. I don't really think I need to say anything. I think Scott's just done my job there quite nicely. And obviously my job's been made an awful lot easier by, unfortunately, what happened to the mill with the fire and such. But just very, very briefly, not mean to take up too much of your time. I mean, what we were looking to do was create, we didn't feel in that location that a kind of contemporary design was appropriate. So we've tried to take the traditional approach in that we've reflected this north light roof, as Scott mentioned, the traditional mill designs that you would usually see up and down the Calder Valley, tried to modernize it slightly and give something that's a little bit different, really. I mean, we did look at other opportunities on the site, but with the flood risk situation in terms of commercial units and things like that, having to have level thresholds and such doesn't really work. And again, with access coming off there. So housing just it works, and we've hopefully created something, a design that as a gateway site to Hebden Bridge. Hopefully, I mean, unfortunately, I guess design is a bit subjective, but we've hopefully created something that the population of Hebden Bridge will like, and yourselves. In terms of just the comments that have been made, I think Councillor Hutchinson, hope I've pronounced that right. You mentioned drainage. We're going to have to put some level of attenuation in there that will be considerably better than what the mill had in the past. And we are, as Scott mentioned as well, we are going to approach people such as Slow the Flow, and just see what's possible on the site. I mean, the applicant is actually looking to build this. We've been told that should this be successful, they want to move forward quite quickly with a reserve matters application, getting building. So this isn't something that's just going to lay dormant and not be built, and looking to raise the value of a site within Hebden Bridge and nothing be done to it. So hopefully that should give you a bit of confidence that we're going to see something there, and hopefully it's something that everybody likes. In terms of the PV panels, Part L in building control is getting more and more stringent with having to provide levels of insulation, levels of green energies and such to buildings. It would be very difficult to pass Part L at building control without putting some form of solar panels there, or ground source heat pumps, or air source heat pumps, or some form of green technologies. So fortunately, it gives us a really good opportunity to do, as Scott said again, the grey water systems, the Slow the Flow systems, all those kind of systems in place. That then obviously creates a better set of circumstances with people buying these at a later date as well. So, I mean, in terms of that, it is definitely something we will have to look at, or we have to look at for building control. Other than that, there isn't really much else that I really want to say or take up too much of your time. Thank you for the opportunity, and I would hope that the members would support the planner's recommendation for approval. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Any questions from members for Sam? No questions. In that case, we'll go to any proposals or comments from members? Councillor Porritt. And I've got Councillor Lynn, then Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of comments, really. Really reassuring to hear that you are keen to do as much as possible in terms of sustainable urban drainage. I mean, it's I don't know, it's great to hear that somebody's happy to do it, but I just want to make sure that we've got that nailed down. Is there any way of potentially bringing that into reserve matters? I know we've still got landscaping in as reserve matters. Is there something that we can just ensure? I know it's in the conditions, but I don't know, to push that as far as it can. And I know obviously we've got an applicant that's keen to do that, but just to really make sure that we've got that kind of legally pinned down. And really, in terms of definitely positive comments, I really like the visual reference to the sort of the mill roof line and that kind of the nod to the industrial heritage, and also the massing of the housing. That again, the nod to the terraces, and that to sort of keeping that visual language going down that road, because that's what you see as you go down there, and that maintaining that rhythm of that kind of a modern interpretation of that. I think it could be, you know, a really quite a special development. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Porritt. I've got Councillor Lynn.
Yes, just very briefly to say, I echo what Councillor Porritt has just said. Driving past the site this morning on my way back from Steve's, I thought how special the site is, but also how appropriate really the designs are. I think they're interesting. I think they're unusual, but I think that echoing back to the industrial heritage, I think is really special. So when the time comes to it, I think this will be an excellent addition to housing, and providing 11 much needed homes in the valley as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lynn. I've got Councillor Curtin, then Councillor Hutchinson. Councillor Curtin. You're on mute still, Councillor Curtin.
Can you hear me now, Chair?
We can.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I don't think anybody's moved any motions or anything yet, so I'm quite happy to move that we accept officers' recommendations, and I'll just repeat what other members have said. I think it's a great design, and I think it'll be a really good, innovative design as you travel up the Calder Valley towards Ebden Bridge, and I'm sure people will love it. So I would say, well done, Sam. Okay.
Gurpreet, I always go straight to you when you put your hand up, so I'll let you go in at this moment.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Curtis, just to clarify, obviously in Maria's presentation, she referred to a number of additional conditions that were going to be put on. So are you happy that your proposal is to go with officer's recommendation with the additional conditions?
Yes, I'm more than happy, Gurpreet.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Hutchinson.
I'd be happy to second that, but I'd also like to comment on the courtyard design, the shared space that's in this development, which I think is a really, really attractive feature of it, which will hopefully bring together the people, an opportunity to bring together the people who live in this development. So.
Okay. So we've got a proposal to go with officers' recommendations. We have a seconder to go with that. Do we have any more proposals or? Okay. So we'll go to the vote then. Councillor Porritt, did you want to put a proposal forward with?
I was really just seeking clarification from Maria as to whether there was any way we could attach the sustainable urban drainage aspect to the landscaping for reserved matters, or whether it's been covered in conditions.
Yes, Councillor, just to clarify, obviously in terms of the agent coming forward with reserved matters, there are the standard things that they need to cover. It is in their gift if they wanted to cover the sustainable urban drainage rather than having the condition carried over to the reserve matters from the outline. They can do that. But if they don't, then obviously it is covered by condition. And I think members just have to recognise that the conditions are there where we have to see the submitted information. It goes off to the relevant consultees and it doesn't get signed off until the relevant consultees are happy with it. So just to give you that reassurance.
Okay.
No, that's fine. I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So we'll go back then to the original. So we've got a proposer and a seconder. Those in favour of officers' recommendations to permit subject to legal agreement? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's everybody. There's no abstentions, no objections. And I'd just like to comment as chair, seeing as though everyone's had the opportunity to vote. I actually like the design of that myself. You know, I've seen some designs in the past. That is industrial stroke modern, and it fits in well with the landscape of the area and Calderdale. I love it. So thank you, everybody. And that's passed. And that concludes our meeting for today. So thank you, members. Thank you, officers.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody.